You'll see how your everyday activities, once injected with the right habits and attitude, will be way better. What is this book all about? This book is all about habits, how they are formed, how they stick in one's brain, and how one can change them whenever necessary. You might have been in disbelief when reading the last how of the previous statement, given that habits, when formed, can be hard to break. But yes, it is possible to change and modify habits, particularly when they are causing more harm than good. This book contains 9 chapters, all with their contributions and stories depicting the different faces of a habit, as well as illustrating how powerful they can be in an individual. That's why the title of this book is The Power of Habit. Your habits have this capacity to rule over you, and it's up to you how you're going to use this power. Go on, read this book. This is a summary, yes, but it has all you require to be completely knowledgeable about handling your habits and will teach you to have power over them rather than allowing them to have power over you. All the information has been compiled to tell you everything you need to know about the power of habit. Sit back, relax, flip the page, and feel your life change. The Habit Cure. Picture yourself waking up first thing in the morning. What do you do first? Perhaps you've done one of these. You've hopped in the shower, brushed your teeth, eaten breakfast, drank coffee, checked your email. What about while and after getting dressed? Do you put on your left shoe first, or were you inclined to wear the right one first? What route did you take to go to work? What did you do first upon arriving at the office? Did you immediately switch your computer on, or did you rest for a while first? When the day is over and you're home, did you eat dinner or watch a bit of TV? Looking back at your activities, you'll see that what you do each day is made up of habits. Decision-making? No, it's not. They're habits ingrained into you, and they have a huge influence over what you're going to do or say. Each habit may seem minute on its own, but over time, it has its own impact on your productivity, health, financial security, and happiness. This book is divided into 3 parts. The first part of the book discusses how habits emerge in an individual. It considers how habits are formed, how new habits are created, and how old ones are changed. It also discusses how certain products have paved their way into people's homes. Brushing one's teeth was once an obscure practice, but now a national activity. A spray became $1 million business by becoming a habit. Alcoholics Anonymous interferes with people's habits to stop addiction, and a football coach reversed a team's fortune and made them champions. The second part discusses habits of organizations and companies. It explores how Paul O'Neill, an executive, changed an aluminum manufacturer into a Dow Jones Industrial Average DJIA top performer just by emphasizing a Keystone habit. With regard to companies, Starbucks' training program is also discussed, revealing how the habits it instilled in its employees strengthens their willpower. Plus, it also tells a story of how even the most talented surgeons can make major mistakes when the hospital's habits fail to function. The third part discusses society's habits. It includes the success of the civil rights movement by changing Alabama's social habits and how the right focus led to the creation of a large church in California's Saddleback Valley. It also hovers on certain ethical questions, such as that of a murderer in Britain who could be allowed to go free provided he can prove that his habits made him kill. Every chapter points to a sole idea. You can change your habits as long as you're familiar with how they work. The premise came about after talking to various executives and scientists and study research done with different companies. All the studies came up with one definition of a habit. A habit is a choice that you deliberately make at one point and continue to do without having to think about it day by day. Once you make a habit, you stop making a choice and the behavior becomes automatic. Upon understanding how it happens, you gain the power of controlling and changing it. The habit loop. How habits work. According to scientists, habits are formed because one's brain is often searching for ways to perform its required duties with as little effort as possible. As it functions on its own, the brain attempts to make a routine a habit so that it can free up space to accomplish more tasks. Once a habit is formed, the brain will no longer make decisions about it. It won't exert much effort and will divert its attention to other tasks, so unless you create a new routine, the pattern will always proceed naturally. Getting to know Eugene. Meet 71-year-old Eugene Pauly. An elderly man around 6 feet tall, Eugene has suffered from viral encephalitis, a condition that seemed relatively harmless at first, even if it's known to produce fever blisters, cold sores, and other mild skin infections. Eugene's case, however, is one of those rare instances when the virus made its way to the brain and inflicted damage on his brain tissues. Doctors initially told Eugene's wife, Beverly, that the damage had been done and that she had to prepare for the worst. Eugene was given medication to battle the viruses. Soon he was strong enough to undergo other tests. The doctors found that most of his body was left unharmed. He could respond to sounds and light and even move his limbs. Physically, Eugene may have appeared fine, but mentally he wasn't. He had difficulty remembering the days of the week and the doctors' and the nurses' names. He couldn't remember his friends. He kept repeating the same activities in short intervals. He repeated statements he had uttered just a few minutes earlier. When asked about his age, he'd say he was about 59 or 60, even if he was in his 70s already. Eugene met a 52-year-old scientist named Larry Squire. Squire spent his time studying Eugene's brain, through which he found out that the virus had damaged Eugene's medial temporal lobe, the part of the brain responsible for recalling memories and regulating emotions. Squire conducted tests and found out that Eugene still had his sharp intellect and all of his habits. However, he couldn't retain new information and couldn't recognize people who he had recently met. Still, he could find his way around the house and Squire's office. Beverly thought they'd have problems when they moved houses, but Eugene had learned to adjust. Eugene once roamed around, which worried Beverly, but when she got home, she found Eugene calmly watching the History Channel. As long as nothing was modified, then Eugene would be just fine. Reminding him to stay home would be pointless. After all, Eugene couldn't remember any newly acquired information, so he'd forget anything you'd tell him in a few minutes or so. Cue, routine, reward. Inside the Massachusetts Institute of Technology are laboratories that aim to study the brain, particularly how it forms habits through rats. These rats have wires inside their heads, ready to be observed and studied. To further understand the brain, picture it as an onion. The outside layers are where the most recent activities take place and are often where complex thinking happens. The layers closer to the stem are the older structures that are responsible for automatic behaviors, for example, swallowing and breathing. Around the central part is where you find the basal ganglia, a group of cells with an unknown purpose except for their potential involvement with Parkinson's disease. To further study the basal ganglia, experiments were conducted with rats. Scientists placed the rats in a T-shaped maze and placed chocolate at an end. At a click, the partition would disappear and the rats would come in and search for the chocolate. They wouldn't find it at first, but they'd find it eventually. According to Duhigg, the basal ganglia is where these patterns are stored. The patterns are accessed so that the mind is given an opportunity to slow down or exert more effort in doing tasks that need more mental energy. The mind accesses patterns through chunking. This is where the brain identifies the corresponding pattern to be used based on the cues received. Once the brain detects a cue, the mind proceeds to perform the habit, and it won't relax until the habit is completed. The mind will then refresh itself to ensure that it received its desired result or reward. This is what is called the habit loop. There are 3 components of a habit loop: the cue that serves as a trigger for the habit, the routine or the action you perform to fulfill the habit, the reward or the result you expected after performing the routine. Being aware of these components will help you intervene and change your habit, especially if it leads to undesirable behaviors. The concept sounds easy, but it's difficult to implement because the habits you create and develop end up getting so ingrained within you that they already override your common sense. You can't just change something that you're so used to doing and has become automatic in your system. How habits affect one's life. Habits can bring either positive or negative effects in one's life depending on how you use them. Eugene had unknowingly realized how to make use of his habits. He had established a routine from this. Every morning he'd take a walk, eat whatever he wanted, and watch the History Channel. It should have been a good sign, but the doctors ended up worrying about his heart because he chose bacon and eggs rather than healthy food. Habits can be pretty delicate. If the cues change even in the slightest way, the habit can fall apart. If something gets disrupted, the habit will be affected. The brain can perform unconscious choices without having to remember what it has learned. Habits play a huge role in how you behave. You may not recall experiences that contributed to your habits, but once your brain has grasped them, they influence how you act without you knowing. A cue can be anything. It can be a thought, emotion, person, whatever triggers your habit. A routine can be complex or simple depending on what you've created. A reward can be a tangible item such as food or intangible item such as an emotional satisfaction. A habit can be changed by even the smallest shift in the routine. Due to your inability to recognize habit loops, however, you're unable to control them. Once you've realized the cues and rewards, then you can change the routine. The craving brain, how to create new habits. You now understand the habit loop, cue, routine, and reward. Anything can act as a cue, whether it's food, emotion, a thing, or a person. Another factor can play a major role, cravings. How are they related to your habits, and how do they contribute towards creating a new one? The story of Pepsident. During the 1900s, a product was born from creating a habit, Pepsident. Pepsident was known back then as a minty, frothy concoction that people needed to be wary of. Claude C. Hopkins, an American executive, was asked to help by a friend to come up with a promotional campaign for Pepsident. It was a problem at first. Americans didn't care about brushing their teeth. If they didn't care about how their teeth looked, then what would make them buy toothpaste? Hopkins was unfazed. If he made people believe that Cleopatra used Palmolive soap, then he could make Pepsident happen. And so, within 5 years, Hopkins made everyone flash their Pepsident smile, not only in the U.S., but also in other countries such as Brazil, China, and Germany. He made toothbrushing an established activity. What was so secret to Hopkins' success? He created a craving. Hopkins believed that once a craving is created, the consumers themselves will find a way to keep using the product. Once a trigger is found, a habit can be formed. Hopkins used this craving concept in Pepsident. He read a book on the film, mucin plaques, which collects on teeth. He told his would-be customers to run their tongues over their teeth to fill the film that's responsible for yellowish teeth and tooth decay. The film served as a cue, something you actually feel and you just can't ignore. That triggers people to respond to the cue as soon as possible. The demand exploded the third week after the campaign launch. Orders were so numerous that the company couldn't hardly keep up. Pepsident became America's best-selling toothpaste in 30 years. Hopkins took advantage of his newfound psychology in boosting Pepsident's popularity. Find the cue and then define the rewards. You'll see, it works like magic. How Febreze came to life. Procter Gamble, P&G, was successful in developing a spray that could eliminate all bad smells. It was a good enough idea, but the company's marketing team had difficulty finding ways to sell it. The company began by giving away samples to test markets. They thought they'd succeeded when they met a park ranger in her late 20s whose home had issues with skunk smells. The woman was ecstatic upon using Febreze. She felt she'd been freed. It seemed like a good deal, but why wasn't everyone buying it? How Febreze made it. Febreze was initially a failure, no matter how promising the product seemed. It was technically a breakthrough and would be a great help to those who clearly needed it, but people just weren't buying it. Why? Because a human's sense of smell has the ability to be immune to scents and lose the capability of detecting them. An example would be the lady who owned 9 cats. She didn't feel or smell the need to use Febreze simply because she couldn't smell their odor. She wasn't aware that the product would be powerful enough to change her life. If she could only smell the difference between the presence and the absence of Febreze. The company executives were already planning to stop production of Febreze when the product management team realized that a reward had to come into play. A habit will be formed when one's brain learns to anticipate and look forward to the reward after being introduced to the cue, even if the routine hasn't taken place yet. In the case of Febreze, the smell was the reward. Consumers looked forward to using Febreze when they realized they would smell a sweet scent after using the product. They got this feeling of victory. Cleaning is a success thanks to Febreze. After utilizing this campaign, sales of Febreze went through the roof. People had recognized the product as an air freshener and had craved the scent since then. Julio and the blackberry juice. Wolfram Schultz is a neuroscience professor at the University of Cambridge. He studied monkeys' brains as they performed certain tasks. His observations and experiments included Julio, a monkey with electrodes inserted in his brain. Schultz observed Julio as he performed tests. Shapes would appear, and then Julio would touch layers. Blackberry juice would flow down the tube and onto Julio's lips. At first, Julio wasn't interested in whatever he saw on the screen. When he realized that paying attention brought him juice, he began to not take his eyes off the screen. Soon, Julio was contentedly licking his lips after drinking the juice. The pattern eventually became a habit. Julio saw the shapes, and he already had the juice in mind. Julio got so used to this pattern that he learned to throw tantrums, make unhappy noises, or even be depressed if he didn't receive his reward after seeing the shapes. Other monkeys displayed a similar behavior, although some of them could still be distracted, provided that the monkey hadn't yet established a strong habit. If the brain had established the habit, then the monkey wouldn't be swayed regardless of the distraction. The monkey would keep pressing the lever until it gets what it expects to receive. This is why habits are hard to break. They bring neurological cravings. These cravings creep into you without you realizing it, and as you feel the benefits, the habits are formed. Do you notice how Cinnabon keeps their stalls away from other food kiosks? This is because they aim for people to keep smelling their cinnamon rolls and in turn creates a powerful craving. Those who smell the rolls when they crave Cinnabon and enter the store once they see one. How are new habits created? Again, here's the pattern. Cue, routine, reward. Craving keeps the loop going. Habits are created by putting together cues to trigger the habit, routine to get one used to it, and a reward to motivate you to do it. A craving will drive the loop and keep it going. An example would be when your phone beeps. Once you hear it, you anticipate the message and you're restless until you read it. If it doesn't make a sound, then you're not bothered. How cravings play a part. Through a good mindset, you can create a good habit. Initially, your drive and energy will be too high. You'll be excited to perform new tasks related to the habit. Let's say you're learning to play an instrument. At first, you'll try to understand new chords and listen to yourself play songs. How will this energy continue, though? This is where cravings come in. For example, you wish to begin a habit of working out each morning. You need a cue to remind you that this is what you should be doing once you get out of bed. What you can do is to prepare your gym clothes next to your bed. Once you get up, you'll see them and you'll feel excited to begin your workout sessions. After you're done, the reward you get can be a sense of accomplishment, or it can be a special meal or snack that you get to enjoy without guilt. You won't realize the reward at first, not until you finalize the cue and the routine. After performing the routine for a while, your mind will then crave the reward that the habit provides. Once the craving is kicked in, that's when a new habit is born. The golden rule of habit change. Why transformation occurs. As previously discussed, a habit is formed through a cue, routine, and a reward. Once they've come into play, an established habit will be hard to break. However, what if there's a habit that must be changed? This chapter teaches readers that a habit can easily be changed as long as the same cues and rewards are in place. The routines can be changed and you'll feel that nothing has changed. Tony Dungy's Road to Championship. Tony Dungy was an American football coach with a different approach. The team he handled, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, was one of NFL's most unsuccessful teams. Other coaches used complex schemes and thick playbooks. He trained his team using few plays. What he wanted for his team was for them to stop thinking and instead perform based on their habits. A new mindset involving habit change is what he believed would work. You just won't overcome a habit. You can only change it if you're able to perform a new routine in a cycle with the same cue and reward. Tony Dungy's trained the team to connect the cues they were aware of to routines that were quite different from what they were accustomed to. He gave routines that had fewer choices, less complexity, and other subconscious reactions. It sounded risky to some, but through this method, 2 teams became championship contenders. Bill and Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill Wilson was a victim of alcoholism in 1934. He drank 3 liquors a day. He lost his job, and so he felt he needed to change his habits as soon as possible. He talked to a drinking buddy who, for 2 months, had stayed sober. Wilson's friend told him to admit his drinking addiction and to surrender his life to God. What Wilson did was to get himself checked into a Manhattan detox center. He underwent intensive treatment and has been sober ever since. Since then, his life has been all about developing Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, which has become a successful program in the United States. If you needed another and perhaps more convincing example of an effective habit change, take AA's 12-step program. An alcoholic usually finds it difficult to overcome an alcohol addiction, but the program succeeds by changing the affected person's routine. How does AA do it? First, the program identifies the reason for alcohol. Is it for relief, escape, stress, companionship? Once it's identified, a similar type of relief will be provided without having to resort to alcohol. Nail-biting Mandy. Another good example is Mandy, a 24-year-old who bit her nails as a habit. With the help of a psychologist, she got to identify what triggered the behavior. With that, she looked for ways to change her routine. She used an index card to keep track of cues. The following week, she had 28 cues. How did she break her habit? Instead of biting her nails, she gripped a pencil or stuffed her hands inside her pockets. Eventually, after a month, she had stopped nail biting. She changed the routine, but she didn't feel that something was missing. Will it ever fail? Because of the routine change, the Buccaneers were successful. However, they faced high-pressure games. Under high pressure, the players were willing to implement their new habits, but they'd lost their trust in the new system. They ended up missing the Super Bowl, and in their second year of missing out, they fired Dungy. For the AA members, the habit replacement proved effective until they got stressed and faced tragedies that made them revert to their old habits or just completely let go of the habit replacement. Changing habits may seem easy, but it's really not. Alcoholics are sometimes not strong enough to do so themselves. With that in mind, another factor comes into play: belief. Regardless of the methods implemented, without the person's belief, the efforts won't be effective. A habit's golden rule is that when you keep the original cue and reward and change the routine, it'll be useless without you believing that you can transform and change. Belief is an important factor. It is a skill that makes habit change possible and even affect other areas of life. Social environments can also help lead to necessary change. Some express their beliefs in some higher power, while some in significant people. What's important is that it occurs and becomes real in someone's eyes. Keystone habits, or the Ballad of Paul O'Neill. Which habits matter most? Changing one keystone habit sets off a chain reaction. This can take place regardless of you being a sole individual or a big organization. The chain reaction leads to the change of other habits not necessarily related to the keystone habit you've initially changed. There are habits that are more important than others, and this chapter explains the reason behind that. These keystone habits help you get ready for major life changes through celebrating small victories and finding ways to develop your other habits. Alcoa's recovery. One perfect example is Alcoa. It was on the brink of destruction. However, Paul O'Neill saved it and took it to greater heights. When O'Neill took over, the company was in bad shape. It was known for 2 things: poor product quality and inefficient workforce. The leader who came before him had tried to improve quality, but it had led to a huge employee strike. O'Neill tried to come up with a different approach, seeing that he needed a fast yet effective way of dealing with things. Had another leader been in charge, he would have focused on the usual stuff such as efficiency and profitability. However, O'Neill believed that you just can't force people to change. It has to come from within. What he did instead was to focus on worker safety. When an employee got injured, the unit president had to prepare an injury report and hand it to Paul within 24 hours. The injury report also had to contain measures to avoid reoccurrence of the accident. Promotions awaited those who complied. Sounds easy, right? At the beginning, it was a challenge. The unit president had to coordinate with the vice president as soon as the incident took place. The VP, on the other hand, had to coordinate with the floor managers who needed to communicate with the employees to come up with solutions in such accidents. How did focusing on worker safety lead to a successful venture? By ensuring the workers' safety, the employees were brought together and produced a new and improved company culture. Everyone felt important and contributed their own ideas for leadership. By undertaking this routine, the safety requirements were met. Afterwards, the other needs were satisfied as well. By dealing with safety, they also achieved both quality and efficiency. Needless to say, O'Neill succeeded in all goals and thus made the company one of the best in the country. First principle, celebrating small victories. The story of Alcoa illustrates how these keystone habits lead to small victories. By establishing a keystone habit, a domino effect is created, leading to more achievements along the way. Michael Phelps had his own story to tell. He had his rituals pre-race that illustrate how the performance and the victory are just parts of the routine. As he does everything as planned, all the other tasks have become small victories, leading to the actual victory in the game. After all, every win had been prepared and well accounted for. To make it more rewarding, small wins have to be celebrated. This makes you feel better, especially if you still haven't accomplished habits that are way more difficult to implement. For example, you decided to wake up earlier than you used to, around 6 in the morning. Your main goal is to learn a different language, which seems to have no relation with you waking up early. However, having that habit will influence other areas in your life that can affect your capacity for learning. When you wake up early, you alter your sleeping routine. Because of altering your sleeping routine, you also affect your everyday activities. Perhaps you're able to accomplish more and leave more time for other tasks. All those changes and achievements are counted as small wins, and they all add up to help you achieve your initial goal of learning a new language. Second principle, structures that help habits. The second principle has been established by observing people who used certain items to establish strong habits and accomplish goals. Case in point, a group of people who aimed to lose weight seemed to succeed better by using a food diary as compared to a group who didn't. Both groups performed the same tasks, but the group who used the food diary was able to identify any lapses or significant behaviors. Another example is those people who've made exercising a habit. They also began eating better and became more productive in the office. Smokers began smoking less and showed a more pleasant attitude with family, friends, and colleagues. They don't get stressed as much. Lots of changes were experienced by these people who all believe that exercising is a habit that triggered all these positive effects. Keystone habits can also start at home. There are children of families who eat together that are believed to have better grades, better homework skills, and greater confidence. Those who make their bed every morning are associated with better budget-making skills, productivity, and sense of well-being. Importance of Keystone habits. Keystone habits make it easier for people to perform tasks that could easily have forgotten about in the face of distractions. They're still able to accomplish whatever they need to do, even if it's too difficult or too hard to focus. It is easier to come up with both major and minor decisions. Starbucks and the habit of success. When willpower becomes automatic. In this chapter, Charles Duhigg argues that you can manipulate and control the things you do and use them to come up with positive habits leading to a better life. Understanding willpower helps you in what you do and enables you to turn it into a productive and helpful habit. How willpower affects you. Willpower is not something you have to be born with. It's something that you can learn as time passes. You might have heard all about the marshmallow experiment. Kids were left alone with marshmallows, and those who learned how to control themselves were the ones who performed better as adults. Willpower is like the muscles of your body. As it works harder, it gets tired. It uses up the energy and doesn't leave much for other tasks. There's also the spillover effect strengthening willpower has. Strengthening willpower in one area spills over to other activities. It affects everything as it gets stronger. You may think willpower is all you have, but it can actually get you places. After all, having self-discipline is more essential to academic performance than intellectual talent. Does willpower run out? If willpower can be learned, then do you have the same amount of it every single day? Why are there days that you're so motivated while on some days you just don't feel like doing anything? To understand the truth about this side of willpower, Mark Muravan conducted an experiment. He performed the same marshmallow experiment with cookies. However, he also made the children complete a difficult puzzle afterward. How did the experiment turn out? Those who ate the cookies stopped the puzzle way earlier than those who didn't. He then concluded that willpower can eventually run out, and so you have to make it a habit of making it stronger. How will you make it a habit? By using the same habit loop: cue, routine, reward. Starbucks training program. The main example for this chapter is Starbucks. They employ people from different walks of life, but still make sure that every customer receives outstanding treatment. How does Starbucks ensure everyone gets treated well? A Starbucks employee is, like everyone else, a human being. It's possible that his or her willpower will get challenged. They might snap, and they might lose control of themselves and be upset with customers. Starbucks created a plan to address that concern. Starbucks implements a training system wherein employees are guided to identify inflection points, triggers, and match them to the appropriate behavior. By identifying the behavior, willpower becomes easier to implement, and employees provide the highest level of service. Aside from its training system, Starbucks is also known for encouraging its employees to utilize their intellect and creativity. To illustrate this further, a test was conducted by the University of Albany. There were two groups of students, and both were given a tray of cookies. The first group was told what the cookies were for, and the second group received no explanation. Results showed that the first group performed better than the second. It could be because people end up performing better and have stronger willpower if they feel like they understand what they're doing and if it's a personal choice. It's harder to follow orders if you don't understand why you're undertaking them. How companies deal with willpower. Duhigg also discusses how companies implement certain methodologies for their employees so they can maintain better willpower. There are those who make employees jot down their strategies on handling difficult situations, such as negative experiences with customers and clients. The management team, on the other hand, creates tactics such as automated responses so employees' willpower won't be used more than expected. You can't turn willpower into a habit in an instant, even with help from other people. Duhigg explains that once willpower, or self-discipline, is developed towards one activity, it somehow teaches the brain to implement the willpower habit towards other activities as well. With this, other habits of your life will also be affected in a positive way. Those companies who implemented such strategies soon saw their customer satisfaction rate go up and their employee attrition rate go down. This pleased executives, knowing that this is something that isn't regularly taught in school or at home. Seeing the positive effects made them realize that their efforts had been rewarded. Yes, willpower can decrease and or fluctuate, but in a professional atmosphere, good treatments will prove to be a big difference. Employees will be motivated to do a better job once they realize that they're not just a number in their boss's attendance file. The power of a crisis. How leaders create habits through accident and design. In this chapter, Charles Duhigg discusses how leaders take advantage of a crisis to push their employees into shaping up and getting better. How? Through creating or even exaggerating a sense of urgency. How an organization functions. Large corporations have multiple departments, for example, shipping, maintenance, sales, etc., and these departments interact with each other. A harmonious relationship is expected, yet realistically it won't happen all the time. Friction between departments or employees within the same department may occur. You'd think an organization would solve adversities by coming up with rational choices through careful decision-making and studies of the situation, but that's not the case. These companies are actually influenced by their habits, patterns that they've used over the years in managing the company. These patterns only tend to change through employees who make their own independent decisions. Companies have their own unspoken routines that govern them. Otherwise, it would be hard for them to keep up with all decisions and rules that they have to deal with every day. On the surface, it may seem like they're still following the set rules, but underneath, they're really living by the habits they've become accustomed to. You might contest this, saying that companies really do follow the rules and not rely on habits. Still, think about it. Whenever there are new employees in the company, the tenured ones tend to not point to the employee handbook and instead brief him or her using the common laws in the company. This is because organizational habits have already been set to provide balance and peace in the company. How a hospital improved. The Rhode Island Hospital during the early 2000s was believed to be one of the country's best medical institutions. However, arrogant doctors created a toxic culture. They mistreated nurses and rejected their assistants, which led to unfortunate tragic mistakes in the operating room, as well as negative publicity. Media, both national and local, were always on the lookout for mistakes. A crisis had taken place. To address this concern, the new chief quality officer of the hospital implemented changes. Video cameras were installed in operating rooms, surgeries required checklists, and an anonymous reporting system was established. After all these changes took place, together with enhanced training systems, the hospital became more prestigious because of its quality service. King's Cross Station. A fire took place at King's Cross Station, a subway station in London in 1987. Unfortunately, there were 31 casualties and there were 100 injured individuals. Upon inspection, it was discovered that certain habits had stopped departments from holding themselves accountable over the fire. A ticketing clerk already saw burning tissue. He put the tissue out but didn't think of reporting the issue, believing it wasn't his department's responsibility. The employees of the station didn't know how to use the sprinkler system, and another department was in charge of the fire extinguishers. There were visible risks of fire. They were reported but were unfortunately ignored. The fire brigade finally came, but they used street-level hydrants rather than the subway-level ones because they were instructed to not use other agencies' equipment. You probably think they should not have acted based on those judgments. However, those reactions and habits were actually implemented for good reason. Once ticketing clerks failed to do their duty when they chose to help tourists and pick up trash, this resulted in delaying in ticket issuance to riders. As a result, ticketing clerks were told to stay within their jurisdiction to be efficient employees. No one has been given final responsibility with regard to passenger safety. The employees had insufficient training, and this led to departments not knowing how to coordinate with one another in case of emergencies. Like the situation in Rhode Island Hospital, this majorly affected the organization. Changing for the better. There are habits that have become established over time, and habits in such organizations end up as laws, albeit unspoken, that everyone learns to implement. However, in the cases of Rhode Island Hospital and King's Cross Station, habits have to be changed for the better. Organizations have to create habits that focus on a single priority over anything else, even if it means the balance of powers in the company will be temporarily disrupted. They have to realize how powerful habits can be in an organization. Once they've been established, they can be hard to eliminate. When is it best to change the habits in a company culture? When it's dealing with a crisis and when everyone feels like there's something that has to be done for the company to survive. In times like these, habits, laws, and policies can all be changed. During these moments, everyone can promote a sense of urgency. How Target knows what you want before you do. When companies predict and manipulate habits. In this chapter, Charles Duhigg discusses how companies' methods of predicting and influence shoppers' habits have changed over time. Decades ago, retailers asked for the help of psychologists to find out how customers think. Now, statisticians use computers to find out what customers think. How Target reads your minds. To predict a customer's buying habits, companies utilize large amounts of data. With this data, they've come to the conclusion that the decision to purchase an item happens when the consumer's first sight of the product. A shopper may have a long list of what he or she is planning to buy, but his or her habits are often more overpowering. Consumers have their own unique habits, and what works for one person may not work for another. To deal with this, companies such as Target collect individual shopping data through their rewards, loyalty, shopper programs, and credit cards. They mix the information with data gathered about your location, age, marital status, ethnicity, and other related details to come up with an idea of who you are and what you do with your life. Here's an example to illustrate this further. Once a week, most likely a weekday, you buy a box of popsicles. In July and October, you buy huge trash bags. With this information, Target will probably think that you have kids, drop by the store and shop for groceries after leaving work, and have a lawn that needs mowing in the summer. What else can Target find out? It finds out that you buy cereal, but your purchase history doesn't include milk. Could it be that you're buying milk someplace else? To address that, Target will send you coupons for milk, school supplies, and other items that you possibly need. The coupons you receive are likely different from those received by your neighbor next door, as the company has seen that they have different needs. Another major influence on a consumer's buying habits is life events. A person's buying habits change whenever they deal with major life events. Target and other related companies always aim to know when you've experienced these changes, when you move, change your job, get married, and give birth, so they can be a part of it. There are consumers who aren't too comfortable with receiving booklets filled with pregnancy-related products earlier than expected. Some of them receive these coupons way before informing their family members. Target addressed this concern. The company now gives coupons inserted between completely unrelated products such as home tools and beer. Because of stiff competition among retailers, they understand the value of catering to their clients' individual needs rather than hoping to appeal to the public. As you, a customer, shop at a particular store, your profile is being developed so that companies can advertise to you based on what you require, and that all happens without you noticing. How familiarity plays a role. You may not know it, but you can actually listen to a song you don't like or eat foods you don't normally eat. How? Through familiarity. The song Hey Ya by Outkast was loved by executives when they first heard it, who predicted it would do very well. When it was first aired, the song was a flop. Listeners would only play the song for about 30 minutes or so and then change the channel. At first, executives hadn't realized the truth about people's relation to songs. Listeners care more about a song's familiarity than its quality. Ask a male listener if he'd listen to a Celine Dion song, chances are he'd say no. However, play a Celine Dion song in front of him, and he'd probably listen. Why does this happen? It's because the areas of the brain in charge of processing music are more inclined to go for patterns and familiarity. The songs you listen to are not really reflections of your preferences in music. They're actually a reflection of your listening habits. Once music executives realized this, they began to understand that Hey Ya wasn't a complete failure and that it was actually too different from other songs being played. What they did was to play the song in between two others, more familiar and popular songs, preferably unoriginal, to make it stick in listeners' minds. Was the tactic effective? The song Hey Ya achieved 5.5 million sales, made radio stations earn millions, and won a Grammy. Did it succeed? You decide. How else are your habits influenced? Stores grab your attention and make you notice new products by placing them in advertisements with those you're already familiar with. Want to introduce new foods into your usual diet? Make them smell, look, and taste like foods you're already eating. Have you realized why the buddy system works in gyms and fitness centers? It's because you'll stay longer in a gym if you're with a friend or if you'll make new friends there. At the end of the day, it's not about blaming the industry for manipulating your habits, but understanding how you can act upon your own habits by performing a new habit in between two existing routines. Make a new habit sandwich, and soon you'll realize you've made a new one. Saddleback Church and the Montgomery Bus Boycott. How movements happen. In this chapter, the author discusses how movements are formed using a three-part process. A simple act can trigger a movement, and to achieve the best results, it has to be done by the right person. A person with the right connections to achieve the desired results and to create the intended habits. Habits created can start a movement, it gains momentum, and attains support as time goes by. After all, people would want to support friends with a worthy cause, right? If a close friend or family member suffered insults or injustice, you'd want to help them. What social movements are made of. There are three components of a successful social movement. First, it begins with the habits of friendship. When someone is affected, those who are close to him or her will immediately extend their assistance. Second, it grows through the habits of the community. It may also involve the weak ties that loosely connect people. With this movement comes the social pressure to belong and to maintain one's social status. Third, it endures and stays because of the leaders giving the participants new habits, new identities, and a feeling of accountability and ownership. First, the social movement. A social movement usually starts with victims of injustice being discriminated against or injured whose friends gather to help. This is a habit loop, cue, friend in trouble, routine, helping the afflicted friend, and reward, happiness from providing assistance. These components can be illustrated by Rosa Parks and her participation in the United States Civil Rights Movement. The story of Rosa Parks. It was December 1st, 1955. At 6 p.m., Rosa Parks made the famous refusal of giving up her bus seat. It was clarified that she wasn't in the white section and that there were 3 seats available for the man to choose. Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to perform such acts of defiance. 2 incidents had already taken place prior to this, but it was hers that ignited the civil rights crusade due to her habits. Mrs. Parks belonged to various social, charity, hobbyist, and religious groups. These groups, however, didn't interact with one another. How did she become the civil rights movement symbol? Timing played a big role. Brown versus Board had just made segregation illegal in public schools. Rosa Parks had what is called weak ties, those ties that loosely connect you to roles in groups. Those weak ties created peer pressure during the Montgomery bus boycott. Not everyone involved knew Rosa Parks personally, but because of peer pressure, they became involved in order not to lose face in social standing. When the newspaper released an article about the black community planning to boycott the buses, everyone in the city believed that the people were doing it. The social habit led to peaceful protest and triggered the civil rights movement and eventually led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. When someone leads a worthy cause, his or her members realize there are habits to follow. The habits produce a sense of identity, self-organization, and ownership. Once all of these have been created, then the movement will achieve real progress and eventually succeed. The neurology of free will. Are we responsible for our habits? To what extent are you responsible for your habits? This chapter discusses this moral question. Brian and Angie. This chapter focuses on Brian Thomas and Angie Bachman. They both have their own individual habits that affect their normal life. Angie lives as a stay-home mom who wishes she could have something to do as she waits for her husband and daughters to get home from work and school. To fight boredom, she got dressed one afternoon and went to the casino. She saw this as a weekly reward for herself. In 2000, Angie's parents got sick and she had to go to Tennessee to visit them. When she got home, she felt that her family didn't need her at all. To alleviate this stress, she went to the casino. Gambling became a habit for Angie. She used to go only to the casino only on Fridays, but she changed her routine and gambled on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. She had become addicted to gambling, but she didn't realize it was a problem until it affected her life completely. In 2001, Angie had reached $20,000 in debt. She kept this from her husband while trying to straighten things up and clean up her act. She tried to fight the compulsion, but she couldn't do it. A few years after, she ended up declaring bankruptcy. She was told that her gambling was done not out of choice, but out of habit. After 3 years, both of her parents died and they left her $1 million. The money made her feel desperate, so she went with her husband to the casino as a one-time thing, but again, it became a habit through which she lost everything, even her own home. 4 years later, a cognitive neuroscientist named Reza Habib performed a study observing the brain activity of both pathological and social gamblers. The gamblers watched a slot machine, and Habib checked the reaction for every result. There were 3 possible results: win, loss, and a near miss. A pathological gambler's reaction to a win is similar to a near miss, but both results trigger the need of the gambler to place another bet. A social gambler's reaction, on the other hand, considers a near miss as a loss, which means he or she may not place another bet. Habib studied 2 parts of the brain where habits reside, the brain stem and the basal ganglia. Another case study which illustrates the point is of a man who killed his wife while he was asleep. He experienced what was called sleep terror. Sleep terror is different from sleepwalking. The former involves the complete shutdown of the brain, except for that part that controls the person's behavior. Those under sleep terror will only act and react based on the primal reaction of their brain. He thought he killed an intruder, but he killed his own wife. When put on trial, the jury let him go because they believed he didn't choose to kill and that he wasn't able to prevent the crime from taking place. You are conscious of most activities that you do in your everyday life. You know how to eat, how you sleep, how you interact with your children. You're aware that those habits exist. Now that you realize habits can change, you'll also realize that you have the power to remake them. Believing that change is possible and making that belief a habit will allow the change to become real. That's how powerful a habit can be. Conclusion. A habit is created when you do something because of signals and cues and when you have something to look forward to upon doing the action. There are times when you're not aware that you're doing something out of habit, but once you've realized what triggered your habit, then that's when you gain the power to change it. Changing a habit may be difficult, but it can be done. Even with just a small shift of your perception, you can change it. With enough conviction, confidence, and belief, you can make or break a habit. Now that you've realized the power of habit, it's time to use habits in your favor. Use them to make yourself a better individual and to perform better. May this book bring you the positive change you were looking for and hoping for. Good luck.